ranks off at number 10 is Henry Rathbone's madness. Now if you don't know who Henry Rathbone is, that's fine because neither did I. Rathbone was a military officer and diplomat, and he was one half of the couple that shared the box seats with Abraham Lincoln and his wife Mary the night he was assassinated. As soon as Lincoln was shot, Rathbone tried to prevent John Wilkes Booth from escaping, but his left arm got deeply slashed from elbow to shoulder. No one thought the injury was that bad, with Lincoln having been shot in the head right next to him, but he ended up passing out from blood loss, and doctors realized the slash was right to the bone on his arm, and Booth managed to sever his artery as well. Now he physically survived, but that was the start of his mental downfall. In the years after the assassination, he just couldn't get over the fact he wasn't able to prevent the assassination. He started being paranoid that his wife Clara was cheating on him, he hated how she gave more attention to the kids than him, and even threatened her on many occasions. The family moved to Germany, but Rathbone later attacked his children in a fit of madness, where Clara tried to protect them, but he shot and stabbed her, killing her instantly. He then went on to stab himself 5 times in the chest in an attempt to commit suicide, but also failed. He was charged with all the murders, but was declared criminally insane after blaming the attack on an intruder. He was committed to a mental asylum and spent the rest of his life there. I did not know that Abraham Lincoln assassination was that juicy until now. Coming in at number 9.
I don't know how anyone could attack their own children like that.
Is the Online Cannibal. I thought I knew about all the quote-unquote Hannibals in the world, but clearly I don't. Armin Meiwes was just your typical computer technician. I mean, if your typical computer technician enjoys cannibalism, then yeah, just your average Joe. Armin used to go on various websites advocating cannibalism and was a fan of the Cannibal Cafe, where people would post about their interest in cannibalism and wanting to do it. He then began putting up adverts on the cafe looking for someone to volunteer themselves to get eaten. I mean, at least he was asking for volunteers, not just going out and killing people. His ads said looking for a well-built 18 to 30-year-old to be slaughtered and then consumed, which I mean is as polite as it can get if you look at the context. He eventually found a willing volunteer called Bernd Brandes, who went to Armin's house on March 9th, 2001. Brandes gave him permission to amputate his penis so that they could eat it together, so Armin fed him 20 sleeping pills and set up a bath for him after the amputation. The two tried to eat the penis, but it was just too chewy. When Brandes finally got out of the bath, he fainted due to immense blood loss, and now Armin was screwed. He was like, should I kill him? Should I not? He never agreed to being killed, but he did end up killing Brandes by stabbing him in the throat and then hanging his body on a meat hook. Keep in mind the two recorded the entire night, but I thoroughly hope the tape was destroyed. It definitely wasn't, but I hope. Armin continued to eat Brandes' body for 10 months post-murder. I mean, is human flesh even good for that long? Don't we have a best before date? I swear we do. Police eventually searched his home after he tried to solicit more victims online, and they found the videotape as well as the body parts that hadn't been eaten yet, and in a shocking plot twist turn of events, he apologized and then became a vegetarian. Guys, if this cannibal can become vegetarian, surely you can become vegan. At number 8, we have the 20,000 Orphans, and this one happened right here in Canada, which I'm not proud of. Now, back in the 50s, the Premier of Quebec was Maurice Duplessis, and he was a very devout Catholic. Now, one day he decided the Catholic Church should be the only caretaker of the alcoholics, the poor, the unwed mothers, and all the orphans in the population. Trusting the church completely, he signed over the responsibility of all hospitals, orphanages, and schools to the church. But sadly, this was not a foolproof plan. Most of the orphans weren't even orphans, they were just born out of wedlock, but the church didn't approve of that, so they took the children away. So orphanages slowly started overflowing, and the government didn't have enough money to subsidize them. They were getting more money for psychiatric patients than they were the orphans, so the church decided to do something. According to the Lunatic Asylum Act, you could commit anyone to an insane asylum to A. maintain social order, B. help them, or C. care for them. them. So citing the maintenance of social order, they put 20,000 orphans into mental asylums. All of them were mentally able and fit, but they were admitted anyway. In the institutions, they were subjected to horrible treatment, getting mentally, physically, and sexually abused just for $1 more than what they'd get as orphans. By the end of the 60s, the asylum era was over, but 79% of those orphans said they couldn't maintain a normal, healthy adult existence, and despite all that, Maurice and the Catholic Church never apologized for ruining those children's lives. That's a long apology overdue, my friends. Filling on number 7.
That was disgusting. Those poor children. And it's disgusting to think that things like that still go on today. It truly makes me sick to my stomach.
7th slot are the Silent Twins. Now, I've heard this story many times now, but I know a lot of people still haven't, and it is a scarily weird event, so I thought I would just include it. So June and Jennifer Gibbons were a pair of identical twins born in Barbados, but who grew up in Wales. In school, the girls used to be the only people of colour there, which made them feel isolated, and to add to that isolation, both girls spoke so fast that understanding them was very hard. They were so severely bullied at school that the principal used to actually let them leave early every day to avoid being bullied. Their way of talking slowly got more and more unintelligible, to the point no one could understand them except each other. The twins at this point spoke to no one but each other and their little sister, and at school would refuse to read and write. In an attempt to get the girls to communicate with others, they were sent to different boarding schools in which they both became catatonic and withdrawn until reunited. By the 80s, the girls were committing crimes like arson, vandalism, and theft, and were later admitted to the mental health institution Broadmoor Hospital. They stayed there for 12 years, and the girls always had an agreement that if one of them died, the other had to speak to other people and live a normal life. During their 12-year stay, they began believing one of them absolutely had to die in order for the other to go on, so Jennifer agreed to be the sacrifice. One day when the girls were being transferred to another clinic, Jennifer could not be awakened upon arrival, and then later died of acute myocarditis, which is a sudden inflammation of the heart. And that literally came out of nowhere, because there were no drugs in her system, no poison. The only evidence was that the day before she kept saying she was dying, and then the next day just died in June's lap. Now at number 6 is Dr. Marcel Petio. Marcel was a French doctor and a serial killer. I'm assuming one was his day job and the other was just a hobby. And you know what they say, don't quit your day job. Now, how he killed people was during the occupation, he would promise Jewish people and other people wanted by the Germans that he could secure safe passage for them outside of France. He'd tell them they would travel to Argentina through Portugal for 25,000 francs a person. Once people would pay him the money and go to his house, Marcel would tell them that Argentine officials required all entrants to be inoculated against any and all diseases, and as a doctor, his victims would trust him to deliver the injection needed. But that injection wasn't a vaccine, it was cyanide. The injection would obviously kill them, and then he would take all their belongings and valuables and dispose of their bodies. At the start, he would just dump them in the Seine River, but that seemed to be a lot of work for him, so he changed up his tactics and for more convenience would drown their bodies in acid or quicklime in his basement and incinerate them. He was caught when his neighbors complained to the police about a foul-ass stench coming from his house and the amount of smoke coming out of his chimney. In preparation of a fire hazard, which is what the police thought it was, police called firemen to his house who found a huge fire in his basement, and in the fire, human remains. Coming in at number 5 is the
senseless, absolutely senseless. Why would somebody do that?
Chichijima incident. Now let's flash back to World War II for a second. In September of 1944, Japanese forces shot down 9 American planes near the Japanese island of Chichijima. All 9 of the airmen tried to escape, but 8 were recaptured and 1 escaped, that one being 20-year-old George H.W. Bush. After the capture of the others, it was found out they had been brutally tortured and beaten before being killed. Each one was beheaded, and then American authorities found out that body parts of 4 of the the victims were then eaten by Japanese officers. I don't even know what to say about this one. Just imagine Bush wasn't the one who survived and he was also eaten. He would have never become president. Would his son have become president? I don't even know. I feel like America would have turned out very different, I feel. What do you guys think? At number 4 is The Mad Butcher of Kingsbury Run, and I wish that was the title of a cute Enid Blyton book, but 'twas not, my friends. Was not. Also known as the Cleveland Torso Murderer, this person was never identified, but boy, oh boy, did he create hell in their 30s. He, they, she, you never know. The person was suspected to have killed 12 people, but modern research points to around 20 victims. Most of the victims were classed as the working poor and lived in shanty towns, which made them easier to target. The murderer would behead every single victim and then dismember them, usually severing their torso in half or at least severing their appendages. Had to be one or the other, am I right? All the male victims were castrated and a lot of them had chemicals all over their bodies. The victims ended up being found way after they were killed, sometimes more than a year later, but identifying them was the problem since they had no heads, just torsos. I mean, last time I checked, you can't identify someone from their belly button or their nipples, so what to do? Now, the serial murders had everyone in Ohio worried, and the murderer even taunted Elliot Ness, the guy working on the case, by leaving the torsos of 2 of the victims in full view of his office. I mean, he didn't just rub salt in Elliot's wound, he just rubbed the torsos right in his wounds. I know that doesn't make sense, but Elliot would get it. Filling our number 3 slot is Smiley. I forgot this was on the list. This one made me so emotional when I was reading it. I actually had to start listening to upbeat music so I wouldn't cry. Legit, true story. Ask Che. This is just horrible in every way. Baby P, who was mostly called Smiley by family, was a very smiley little baby that was hiding months and months of abuse and pain inflicted on him by his mum and stepdad. The stepdad would literally use him as a punching bag to the point he had trained Smiley like a dog almost. He would instinctively put his head on the ground every time his stepdad came into the room. All the while his mum was just chain smoking and playing online poker. He would get suffocated in layers of clothing till he was gasping. His fingernails were ripped off by pliers. The stepdad trained their Rottweiler to bite Smiley. There was skin missing from his nose, his lips and tongue. His left ear was ripping so it was coming away from his head. He had 8 broken ribs, a fractured shin bone. His front tooth had been knocked out and later found in his stomach, and the stepdad used to even throw him in the air and let him just hit the ground. One day he did it so hard that he snapped Smiley's spine in half. When police searched their house, they found dog and human feces everywhere, the dead bodies of chicks, mice, and a dismembered rabbit. But worst of all, they found Smiley's cot and bedroom walls covered in his blood. He weighed what a baby 5 months younger than him should have weighed, and he had been headbutting the walls and floors to inflict pain on himself. The mum and stepdad were arrested for the murder later on, but I just can't wrap my head around how messed up in their head you have to be and how evil you have to be to do that to a defenseless child. Smiley had even started saying his first few words and calling his stepdad dad. How can you do that? How can you do that to a kid? I don't understand. I think what made reading the story worse was that they had a graphic image of what his wounds would have looked like, not an actual picture of him, but a graphic, and it was just not good. Now at number 2.
That breaks my heart, that poor child. I remember when I first heard about that. It's sick and disgusting. People like that don't deserve children. Do they know how lucky they are to do that to a child? It's sick, and they deserve pain. They deserve a hell of a lot of pain to be inflicted on them.
2 is the Jonestown Massacre. I know, you guys have heard it all before, but regardless, I did have to put it on the list. If you know the story, feel free to skip to number 1, but if not, stay tuned for a wildly sinister story. The People's Temple Agricultural Project, better known as Jonestown, was a massive city which was actually just a cult run by Jim Jones, located in Guyana. The base of the cult was originally in Indianapolis, but after receiving heavy criticism, he moved his cult from location to location until finally leasing 3,800 acres of land in Georgetown. In the summer of 1977, Jones and his hundreds of followers moved to Jonestown, and by 1978, the population of the city had peaked at under 900 people. Life in the commune was bad, but for the followers, they were reaching some sort of enlightenment. Jones's mental and physical health started declining rapidly. He had developed lung cancer and was actively abusing drugs like Valium, LSD, and barbiturates, to name a few. Reporters and Congressman Leo Ryan came to Jonestown and were all assassinated. 5 people died, and despite later reporters saying they would say Jonestown was in good standing, the damage was done. Jim claimed he had failed and that all was lost. That night, a broadcast was made for every follower to return to their house. During that time, aides made huge metal tubs with grape flavored Kool-Aid that was poisoned with cyanide, Valium, chlorohydrate, and Phenergan. Jim called everyone to the pavilion after that, and he gave the death speech to his followers that was recorded and can actually be heard online, and soon after the members started drinking the poisoned Kool-Aid one by one. First was Roletta Paul and her 1-year-old infant. Like, they literally had to inject the poison into the kid's mouth to get the deed done. Death happened pretty quickly, 5 minutes for kids, even less for babies, and around half an hour for adults. That day, 918 people died in a mass suicide, which was the largest single loss of American civilian life until 9/11 happened. And finally, at number 1 is the doll maker. This one actually made my skin crawl, like it's disgusting. So Anatoly Moskvin was a Russian philologist who did unspeakable things. Now, it started when he was a young schoolboy. He would often visit cemeteries and would blame his obsession with the dead on the fact he saw a funeral procession for an 11-year-old girl when he was younger. Apparently, funeral goers forced him to kiss the corpse's face, who he didn't even know that well. As he grew older, he got more and more interested in death, the occult. He had a library consisting of 60,000 books about it and a huge collection of dolls. But dolls they were not. Despite being described as a genius eccentric by fellow academics, Anatoly was arrested in November of 2011 after police started investigating a slew of grave desecrations in several cemeteries. When they stormed his house, they found 26 corpses, but he'd actually desecrated a record 150 graves. God knows what he did to the rest of those bodies. He made the child corpses into actual dolls. He would mummify each one to preserve their bodies. He would then wrap their limbs in strips of cloth to make them seem more full before dressing them up in wigs and brightly colored children's clothes. All these details convinced his parents, who he was living with, that they were homemade dolls and not real people. Like, how dumb can you be? He claimed it took him 10 years to assemble all the dolls, and since his parents traveled often, they had no idea what he was up to. He was declared to have paranoid schizophrenia, which saved him jail time but put him in an asylum. When asked why he did all of this, he said he had a lot of sympathy for dead children and felt they should be brought back to life. He put their remains in dolls' clothes so they could have functional bodies when they did come back to life. He knew he was committing a crime but felt that children were just calling out to him, begging to be rescued. I think my face says it all at that point. And that's it for today's video, guys.
Wow, what did you think of that? Very emotional. Well, let me know what you think.